Hey guys, today I want to talk about being an expat or an immigrant with a family and sending your kids to school. One question that I see over and over in online forums and in expat groups is, where do you send your kids to school? What do we do when we move down? Where do our kids need to go to school? If they don't speak the local language, can they go to a local school? Do they need to go to an international school? There's always so many questions around schooling, which is understandable because it's a really big decision that we all make, especially for our kids. They're there for a lot of hours during the day, and we want them to be happy, and we want them to do well, and we want them to assimilate into the country that as a family we've chosen to move to, or as adults we've chosen to move to, and we're dragging them along. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. But first, before I get into the local schools that I'm aware of, I kind of want to talk about our experience with schools in the US and how that was a huge factor in me personally wanting to move out of the US and to not put my kids in US schools. So when I was growing up, I loved schools. I went to first a private school, then I was homeschooled, and then I went to a public high school, and I loved my public high school. I had a great experience, a great time, and so I always just assumed that that's what I would do with my kids. Then I decided to become a clinical mental health counselor, and one of my specialties is adolescents. And so I worked with a lot of adolescents when my kids were young. I worked in a treatment school. I worked with clients who were in public schools and private schools, and I also worked in a US university. And based on all of those experiences, I decided I was never going to send my kids to school in the US. So I decided to homeschool. And also my daughter, my oldest, had some really awful experiences in her private school. She was bullied. One girl at one time at recess, she stuffed rocks into cornbread and hit my daughter in the face with it. She was 3 or 4 at the time. I mean, they were really young. And I just saw this culture of violence and just problems that were most likely going to continue throughout all of her education. So I thought, this is not what I want. I'm also the Columbine generation. I was going into high school when Columbine happened. And there's just a lot of, honestly, trauma, PTSD, lots of fears around schools with people in the US. And you see it when they move down here as well. That's maybe one of the reasons why there's so many questions around it, but there's a lot of concerns, and they're not unfounded. They have reason to have those concerns. And I think it's only gotten worse over time. Everyone always says, well, your kids go back to the US for a university. And I'm like, I hope not. Because after my experience working in a university, I worked in the mental health part, so just with counselors. But we had so many counselors and so many students, like over 50 counselors on staff. And for me, I was only able to see each student once every 3 weeks. So if you kind of do the math there's a lot of kids needing fairly significant mental health help. And it wasn't just, oh, I'm having a hard time adjusting to college. Of course, you would get those people, but there were people that were raped on campus, and there were people that were homicidal, suicidal, both. A lot of really, really significant issues that I was seeing. And the most concerning part for me were the other counselors. So we would do staff meetings, I think it was once a week. 2016 is when I worked at the university, so it's been a while. But once a week or once every other week, I don't remember specifically. But we would all get together and we would have to share, what pronoun do you want to be referred to during this staff meeting? And, all of these things that I personally just think are ridiculous, and it's setting a ridiculous culture for the university, for the professionals in the university, and for all of these kids that are coming up. I did not like it, I didn't stand for it, and I didn't want my kids to go there. And I only imagine that now in 2024, it's gotta be worse. The stories that I hear are worse. The stories that I hear from other mental health professionals in the US make me very nervous. So we didn't want to send our kids to US schools. So that was a huge factor of us moving. So we homeschooled, got to Uruguay and realized we couldn't homeschool anymore because it was illegal. So what do we do? So I start visiting all the private schools. We didn't want to do public school because I had a concern of, for me personally, my kids were younger at the time. I had a 2-year-old, so she was going into K2. I was concerned for my kids to not be able to communicate with anyone in the school if something went wrong, if they were sick, if they were sad, if they were scared, or whatever the situation may be. I needed there to be somebody there that spoke English that they could go to and say, I need help, I need you to call my mom. Just to be able to communicate was really important to me. So we were only looking at private bilingual schools because there's a lot of schools. So if your kids are older and they're going into a high school and they don't speak the language, well, they're going to need tutoring if that's the case, first of all. They need somebody that's helping them with the language because all their core classes are going to be in their non-native language. And they're going to be expected to pass them. So if you have an older kid and they're going into high school, I think you should just know that, or they're already in high school. It's not going to be easy for them. It is possible. I have seen people do it. I've seen people do it successfully, but it's going to be difficult. If you have a younger kid, you have more time and it's going to be a lot easier. But for me, it was important that they were able to communicate. So you have international schools. So you have like a German school, an Italian school, you have an American school, a British school. There's probably other ones. There's a lot of international schools like that. We chose not to do that because we didn't like the curriculum in the US. We were leaving for a reason, and we didn't want the culture, we didn't want the curriculum. We wanted our kids in a different type of school. And where we moved, there actually wasn't even an American school, so it didn't matter. There are Cambridge schools, so you get Cambridge certifications and you do testing. Basically, it's for people to say, we know English. If you're a native English speaker, that's not a big deal for you, but you still get the Cambridge English curriculum, which is nice, and it's bilingual, and so it means a lot of the teachers are going to speak English. It also means that your kids are going to learn British English, which is its own separate thing. And if your kids are from the US or Canada and they don't speak British English, they're going to get some things wrong and it's going to make you upset, but it's okay. They're going to say, have you got an apple? I haven't got an apple. That's what my 3rd grader is currently learning, and I'm like, that is not proper English. It is do you have, but it's not a big deal. It's okay. They're IB schools. A lot of expats really like IB schools. They want their kids to have an IB diploma. And then there's just regular bilingual schools, local schools that are bilingual. That's generally what I have liked the most. I've had really good experiences in those schools. So I've had in South America a kid go all the way through kindergarten. I've had my middle started in 2nd grade and now he's in secondary. And my oldest started in, well, she was in 4th, got moved up to 5th. So 5th grade, and now she's getting towards the end of her high school career. So I do have quite a bit of experience in schools in South America at this point. So there's also Waldorf schools, there's Montessori schools. I originally thought maybe I would love a Waldorf school. I found out it's pagan and into the occult. So if you're a Christian like I am and you're considering a Waldorf school, I don't suggest it or recommend it. Happy to provide more information on another forum, but that's that. We chose a Montessori school that was bilingual, and I think it's probably the best school in the whole world. I have nothing bad to say about it. And then my daughter went into an international quadlingual school when she started secondary, and now all of my kids are in an international bilingual school that is Cambridge and IB. So when we started, we were the only North American family in our school. There was an Australian family, a couple French families, some Brazilians, people from Argentina. There were international students, but there were no other North Americans. And in our experience, in that school and my daughter's secondary school and in the school that my kids are in now, across the board from Uruguay and Argentina, which we're in Argentina now, the first year is hard because the kids don't know you, you don't know them, you don't understand the culture. Our second move, even knowing the language, it was still hard because there were cultural differences and there were preconceived ideas of what North Americans are like or who they are, or even they're probably only here for a year, so let's actually not get close to them. So we were really careful to say, hey, we're here and we're not going anywhere, so please be our friend. And that seems to have worked really well for my kids. Because a lot of people come and they're like, oh, we're gonna have this South American experience for a year, and we're gonna go into the schools and we're going to demand that the teachers accommodate for our kids that don't know any Spanish, even though we're leaving in a year. And we're gonna be really difficult, and we're going to insert ourselves into your lives, and then just as quickly as we came, we're going to leave. And so that is one thing that, generally speaking, people don't like. So it's important not to be that person. But once, in our experience, once you are accepted into the culture and into the school and in with the friends, you will have a friend for life. I mean, they are very welcoming. Once they get to know you and they have the opportunity to get to know you, they're very welcoming. I remember the first family that invited us over, and this is just specifically for North Americans from the US, because it is in regards to our government. And so we came, and they're really friendly. They speak English. I'm so thankful. Their kids are nice. And the husband of the wife that I was becoming friends with was like, what do you think about your government? And I was like, well, there's a reason I'm not there anymore. I don't like what they're doing. I don't like the endless wars. I don't want to be a part of that. And he's like, all right, we can be friends. So I feel like it's important to understand that when you're meeting people from the schools, like to understand what culture they're coming from and where we're coming from, and to somehow meet in the middle. And I think it's important for our kids to understand that. There's some North American kids that come to Argentina and they say, oh, nothing is nice here. We don't like the roads here. The restaurants aren't nice. Well, that's rude. Because some people that your kids go to school with own a restaurant. Some people that your kids go to school with, their parents probably helped design that road. So a lot of North American kids get stuck because they get into this comparison game, and the locals are not going to like that. So that's really important. The other thing that's really important is when you're learning the language, just try. I know it's awkward. I know it's embarrassing. I know we sound like idiots, but we just have to try. We have to swallow our pride and try, and our kids have to do the same in school. It's really important. So in Uruguay and Argentina, schools are safe. There's no school shootings. There's, generally speaking, there's not gang fights at school. I don't know of any. There are fights here and there, but usually among friends, like one boy and another boy who have been friends get in a fight. Maybe like throw a punch or two. It happens. But it's not like, oh, we hate this person and we hate this other person and we're just gonna brawl at school and there's nothing friendly about it and it doesn't end well. So that doesn't happen here in my experience. Maybe there's some people that can say, oh, well, this happened and this happened. I don't know, but in my experience, that doesn't happen. Also, there's no extra genders. You are either a he or a she. And Spanish is gendered communication, but you're a he or a she. Nobody's worried about each other's pronouns, like my experience in the US, which I appreciate. There's no litter boxes in the school. Actually, kids here find that really funny, and they always want to ask us, oh, are there actually furries? Does that exist? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, no. And so they talk about it all the time, and it's really funny. We don't have litter boxes in our schools here. I know a lot of schools in the US do. I think that's ridiculous. That's my personal opinion. So I appreciate that that's not here. I appreciate that history is more history. It's real and it's less doctored, I feel. Even the bad things about these countries, like there's been genocide in a lot of countries. It's still talked about. People learn it. We want to learn from our mistakes. The education that I have found here has been really good. Honestly, I believe it's very far ahead of the US from what I know in a lot of ways. Not just what level of math are they in, but how are we learning to think and how are we preparing these kids for the world that they are graduating in now, which even since the pandemic is different. The world after COVID that our kids are graduating into is very different from the world before. There's a lot more online. AI is coming into place. Like I just went into my kids' school and they had this whole project that was lining the halls that they had done on AI, and maybe I'm sure that's also happening in the US as well, but they're really trying to keep up with how are we going to prepare these kids? There's one school here where we live that has an extra year of high school because they want to, it's more of a STEM school. So there's a lot of options that you can do for whatever fits your kid's personality. There's performing arts schools. There's schools that focus on tourism. There's schools that focus on languages. There's schools that focus on STEM. There's schools that focus, well, IB is its own different thing. But there's a lot of options, and education can be tailored to the pros and cons of what your kid has and what they enjoy doing and where they want to go with their life. So there's a lot of options here that I don't recall having in the US. So we really like the schools here. I'm a huge fan of them. My kids are very happy. The teachers are amazing. And you know, it's interesting because teachers around the world don't make a lot of money, but especially in South America, their salaries are quite low. And they work long. So there's two different types of schools, I should say first. There's half day and a full day. So you can choose if you want to do the half day or the full day. If it's bilingual, it's always a full day because they do half the day in Spanish, half the day in English, or, I mean, there's German and Spanish, there's Italian and Spanish, but half and half. But these teachers, they work a lot and they work long hours and they work hard. And anytime I go in to have a meeting to check in about how my kids are doing, they know my kid. Not just their grades, not just, oh, this kid is really good at math and maybe they're struggling in literature, or their Spanish is really good, or did you know that your son that's a native English speaker missed this on his English test? Like, they know those things, but they also know who my kid is because the schools and the culture are focused on community and on who we all are and what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are that we can work on. And they can pull up parts of my kid's personality that shocks me because they're not small classes. I mean, they're fairly large classes, like, you know, 20 kids, maybe 25 in a class. And they know these kids. And I'm always so appreciative. And this has been across every school that we've gone to. Not just the one we're in now, not just the one that I think is the best school in the world that's in Uruguay, but all the schools. Like, I have been so grateful for all the teachers to help my kid. And when they didn't know Spanish fluently, my son's first Spanish teacher knew 0 words of English, and she had her Google Translate out, and she connected with him in a way that made him feel comfortable and made him want to learn Spanish, where his 7-year-old self said, I'm never learning this language. I hate it. Now, he communicates with other expat kids in Spanish. I mean, it is his native language. He thinks in Spanish. I mean, he is now his first language as well. He has 2 first languages. So the teachers have been lovely. I know my friend who's a teacher had a Russian kid in her class, and she was Google translating Russian. She's like, I know all these phrases in Russian now. I mean, they care. Despite the fact that they're not making a ton of money, they care about the kids, and I've seen that 100% of the time, and I'm so grateful for it. There's also some cons, and I want to share a couple of those as well. So I think there's 2 that I have written down that I didn't want to forget. Okay, so first, they do participation grades, and as a North American, it upsets me deeply because I want to go in and I want to look at their grades and say, what is this test weighted? What is this homework assignment weighted? And what is this quiz weighted? Or what is this paper? Or whatever the assignment is. Like, what's the percentage that it is weighted for the overall grade? And I want to go in, I want to add everything up, and then I want to see what the grade is. They don't do that here. If you want them to do that, you're going to be sorely disappointed, like I have been so many times. And I'm like, but my daughter made... So they have like a 0 to 10 grading scale. And I'm like, but my daughter made a 9 on this test and a 9 on that test. Why is her grade a 6? That doesn't make sense. Well, she didn't participate. Well, she doesn't speak Spanish yet and she's shy. She still has to participate. They will not give any leniency on participation. It doesn't matter the personality and it doesn't matter the language ability. None of it matters. You have to participate. I understand now that I've been here 6 years a little bit. It's like, okay, if you're participating, you're engaged. And if you're participating, you're paying attention and you're not doing something else. And so there is value to it. Still don't agree with it necessarily. Still don't like it because my kids always have higher averages. Not always, because now they participate. But in the beginning, they always had higher averages on their academic work than their grade reflected. And I found that ridiculous and unfair. And I would like roll into every school I've ever been in with smoke coming out of my ears and ready to argue it and then basically talking to a wall because it didn't matter. So that was one thing. And then the other thing, well, that's really it. Participation grades and lack of understanding the grades are the two things that I wanted to talk about. And as well as what I've already said, is just taking time to fit in and taking time to understand the culture and the process of how everything works. Overall, if I were to rate this on a 10-point scale, I give South American schools a 10 out of 10. I love them. I love that they're safe. I love that there's no weird agendas being taught. I love that people aren't woke. I love that there's not any strangeness happening. I love that my daughter, who's in 10th grade, there's no kids that are pregnant yet. I love that the culture is different, and I love that the schools are different. And so I think it's great, and I think that anybody that comes with an open mind and willing to stay and willing to walk through the difficulties of not knowing the language and trying to help your kids in a language that you don't know, or hiring tutors and navigating all of these things, I think if you're willing to do that, I think you won't be disappointed at all. I think it's a great experience and something that will help your kids for the rest of their lives. Being bilingual is an asset. Understanding different cultures is an asset. Understanding how to walk through hard things that are unknown is a huge asset in life, and I think that your kids will always be grateful in the end. Maybe not the first year, but in the end.